God commands, this is a day to remember each year from generation to generation. As we read together, you must celebrate it as a special festival to the Lord. This is a law for all time. So God declares a brand new year for his people. A year of new beginnings. The English word sin that we use in our language day to day, you may know this, is derived from the German word Sünde, which has the sense of dividing. The closest English relative to this German word Sünde would be sunder. How many have heard that word? Sunder. That's where the word sunder comes from. Everything in the cosmos exists in relation to the Creator God before they exist in relation to us or anything else. And sin divides and scatters us. It puts all of this to sunder, if you will. Dividing. And all of creation, as we saw, is involved in this severing. And it's a severing of our relationship with the Creator God through whom we find our identity and our unity. Sin severs us from our very source of that in Him. So as God led the Israelites out of slavery, which is to say, out of the bondage of sin, God establishes this meal. A meal that identified them as His. And that united the whole people, gathering them in their household around a common table and around common food. And He declared that this act of identity and common unity must be commemorated down through the ages as the defining practice of the Israelite nation. This meal would be the defining practice of who His people would be. The Passover meal, in a word, was a recovery. However imperfect, it was a recovery of the natural intimacy and easy unity and fellowship that we saw in the garden, Genesis 1 and 2. This meal was a recovery of that. However imperfect, God hosting a banquet at which His human creatures share life-giving relationship with Him and with each other. Much like we saw in Babette's feast a couple of weeks ago. Much like we saw take place there. Though this theme is somewhat subdued in the Exodus story, it's not loud and in your face. It's a subdued theme. The united Israel was intended by God to be a list. The redemptive rescue operation is directed to the descendants of Adam and Eve, which is to say, to the whole human race. Right down to you and me in this room today. Right down to our cities and neighborhoods. The whole human race. God chose Israel neither because of their special merits, nor for their peculiar advantage, but rather as a vehicle. Everybody say vehicle.
Vehicle.
They were to be His vehicle to carry His salvation to the nations, all the ethnos, people groups of the world. And again, as I told you a moment ago, we even begin to see hints of this in the fact that there were others besides Israelites that found refuge in the Israelite homes and thereby also participated in the exodus of those who left Egypt. A sign already of his desire for all the people groups of the world. These slave families gathering in hope and fellowship around him were, in the biblical reading, they were the seeds from which the family of God will grow. Now, the second Older Testament instance of meal symbolism that we have already cracked open this morning is this vision that we see found in our Isaiah text. The prophet Isaiah is probably one of the greatest poets in the scriptural tradition. And one of his master images on display throughout his writings, you study Isaiah and you'll find this. One of his master images on display throughout his writings is the Holy Mountain. The Holy Mountain. In our Isaiah text today, we find this splendid vision. We read together, in the last days, the mountain of the Lord's house, says Isaiah, will be the highest of all. It will be the most important place on earth. It will be raised above other hills, and people from all over the world will stream there to worship. People from many nations will come and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of Jacob's God. For there he will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths." The mountain of the Lord's house is none other than Zion, where the temple, the place of right worship, is situated. So what is Isaiah seeing here? Well, Isaiah dreams here of the coming together of all the scattered tribes of Israel, indeed of the whole world, around the worship of the one true God. The division that commenced, the sunder, as we talked about a moment ago, the division that began with the idolatry that took place in the Garden of Eden. You will be like God, knowing good and evil, Genesis 3, verse 5. All of that is healed through a grateful acknowledgement of God's primacy. And the distinctive mark of this rightly ordered worship is peace. Everybody say peace.
Peace.
Peace. Look what Isaiah says. We've read it together. I'll read it again. For the Lord's teaching will go out from Zion. His word will go out from Jerusalem. The Lord will mediate between nations and will settle international disputes. They will hammer their swords into plowshares. The plowshare was a tool that was made to furrow the soil, as the farmers would use. And they will hammer those swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. This was signs of peace that Isaiah was speaking of here. What a powerful prophetic word that touches on even what we are seeing in our days today. So having found friendship with God, Isaiah implies here, human beings will rediscover friendship and kinship with one another. And they will not feel the need to train for war any longer. The cosmic implication of this reconciliation is plain. In the 11th chapter of Isaiah, which we didn't read together, but I invite you to turn there, will you? Isaiah chapter 11. chapter 11, and there are a boatload of things that we could look at here today. And I'm trying to do this in a very cursory way where we kind of look at an overview of it to get an idea. But look at this in Isaiah chapter 11. The prophet dreams of the age of Messiah. In that day, verse 6, in that day, the wolf and the lamb will live together. The leopard will lie down with the baby goat. We have it on the screen. Let's read it together. Lift your voice with me, will you? In that day, the wolf and the lamb will live together. The leopard will lie down with the baby goat. The calf and the yearling will be safe with the lion, and the little child will lead them all. The cow will graze near the bear. The cub and the calf will lie down together. The lion will eat hay like a cow. The baby will play safely near the hole of the cobra. Yes, a little child will put its hand in a nest of deadly snakes without harm. Nothing will hurt or destroy in all and cosmic peace, as we see in these scriptures that we already read together, where, we're seeing these curious things like lions laying down with lambs, and bears and calves together, and there's no harm. And a child will lead them. What's Isaiah saying there? Well, he's talking about how now the dominion and the rule and reign of God will not be, as we know, the egotistical rule of many of our own human governments and nations. One that is driven by domination and hunger and lust for power and control and seeking to dominate and to oppress humankind into the wishes of whatever the egotistical agenda is. As we're seeing even now with Putin and Russia over the Ukraine. Isaiah says that with the reign of God, with the coming of God's kingdom, with the age of Messiah, it's not going to be one